This happened last fall in southern Oregon. I'd been planning to do a solo hike on an old forest trail that I found on a hiking forum. The trail wasn't maintained anymore. There wasn't much info about it online, except a couple of posts from years ago. People said it was overgrown, but that there was an old hunter's cabin at the end. Honestly, I felt that mix of excitement and nerves, not knowing exactly what to expect. I've always liked to think of myself as cautious but adventurous, so I packed my day pack with extra food, a big water bottle, and all the safety gear, just in case. I parked at this tiny dirt pull-off, barely big enough for my car, checked my map. The air was cloudy, not raining, but that kind of fall dampness that makes everything feel quiet. The first part of the trail was okay, even though it was getting swallowed up by ferns and moss. After about an hour, the path was so faint I kept checking my phone's GPS, just to make sure I wasn't walking in circles. Eventually, the forest started getting thicker. The silence was almost uncomfortable. You know that moment when your ears start to ring because there's just nothing else to hear? After about 3 hours, I found the cabin. It looked like nobody had touched it in decades. Most of the roof was caved in, rusty metal tools scattered on the ground, half buried in old leaves. I walked around the outside for a while, taking pictures, listening. I remember thinking how strange it felt to be out there all alone, but also kind of freeing. I sat down on a fallen tree to eat lunch. That's when I heard it, this metallic sound, somewhere off in the woods, like metal hitting metal, at first faint, then a little louder. It was almost rhythmic, but with long, uneven pauses. I tried to tell myself it was just a woodpecker or something falling from a tree, but honestly, it sounded like someone was swinging a metal bar against something. It was distant, but the way the sound bounced through the trees made it feel close. I packed up my stuff and decided to head back. For the first half mile, every time I stopped to catch my breath, the clanking would stop too. When I started walking again a minute later, clank, clank. I can't really describe the feeling, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. At one point, I turned around and I swear I caught a glimpse of someone moving between the trees. I couldn't see any details, just a dark shape. Maybe it was my imagination, maybe not. The closer I got to my car, the more I felt like I was being watched. I kept telling myself it was just nerves. Maybe I was just hearing echoes, or maybe I was just tired. But when I finally got back to the pull-off, my car was still the only one there. It was getting dark. The whole place had that heavy, oppressive silence that just makes you want to get out of there as fast as possible. Here's the creepiest part. About a week after, I checked that same hiking forum just to see if anyone else had posted about the cabin. Someone new had left a comment. They asked if anyone had ever met the old man with the iron cane on that trail. They said they'd heard the same metal clanking noises. I have no idea what was out there with me, but I know I'll never go back to find out. This story happened about 7 years ago when I was home from college for summer break. My family owns a decent chunk of forest land in central Pennsylvania, right against some state game lands. Growing up, I spent a lot of time out in those woods, camping with my dad, wandering trails, climbing old trees, and just getting lost in my own head. There was always something peaceful about being out there where you could walk for hours without seeing anyone or hearing anything but wind in the leaves. One weekend that summer, I decided to camp alone in this old clearing about a mile from our house, a place where my dad and I used to build fires and tell stories late into the night. I hadn't been back there by myself since I was a kid. I guess part of me just wanted to see if it still felt the same. Or maybe I was chasing that old feeling of freedom. I packed my small 2-person tent, a sleeping bag, a couple of flashlights, my favorite book, and way too much food. I always overpacked for these things. I left late in the afternoon when the sun was still high and the woods were full of that golden, slanting light that makes everything seem calm and safe. The walk out to the clearing took maybe half an hour, but I took my time, stopping to look at animal tracks and listen to the birds. It was late June, so the air was thick with bugs, and the forest was alive with all the summer sounds. Frogs, crickets, the occasional deer crashing through the brush. I remember thinking, as I walked, that I hadn't felt this relaxed in a long time. By the time I got to the clearing, the sun was already dipping low behind the trees. I set up my tent, laid out my sleeping bag, and gathered enough wood for a small fire. I sat on a fallen log, made myself a sandwich, and just listened to the forest for a while, letting the peace settle over me. Everything felt normal. I texted my mom that I'd made it okay, then put my phone on airplane mode to save the battery. As dusk settled, the forest changed. The birds went quiet and the sounds of the day faded, replaced by the soft buzzing of mosquitoes and the far-off call of an owl. The fire crackled, sending sparks up into the darkening sky. I stared into the flames, poking at the logs with a stick, letting my mind wander. I felt safe, but at the same time, I couldn't shake this strange, uneasy feeling, like the silence was waiting for something. After a while, I put out the fire, crawled into my tent, and zipped myself in. I turned on my little lantern, propped it up in the corner, and tried to read, but I couldn't concentrate. Every little noise outside seemed louder than it should have been. A twig snapping, leaves rustling in the wind, the distant creak of a tree branch. I kept telling myself it was just the normal sounds of the forest, but every now and then I'd catch myself holding my breath, listening, wondering if maybe there was something else out there. It's strange how when you're alone in the woods, your mind fills in the gaps with things that aren't really there. Eventually, I set the book aside, turned off the lantern, and lay back, staring up at the ceiling of the tent. I listened to the sounds outside, trying to match each one to something familiar. I drifted in and out of sleep, my dreams blending with the noises from the woods. I don't know how long I slept, but at some point I woke up, heart pounding, sure that I'd heard something moving just outside the tent. For a minute, I just lay there, barely breathing. I tried to convince myself I was dreaming, but then I heard it again, a low murmur like voices far away. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, almost like a conversation. I couldn't make out any words, just the rhythm of it, soft, then fading, then back again. I strained to listen, telling myself it was just the wind, or maybe some animal noises, echoing weird in the trees. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around me, trying to calm down, but the voices didn't go away. If anything, they seemed to get a little closer, rising and falling like a strange chant. It was almost hypnotic. I closed my eyes and tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Then, just when I thought maybe it was all in my head, I heard footsteps, slow, crunching through the leaves, circling the tent. I could see faint shadows moving outside, just barely visible through the thin fabric. My heart was racing. I lay perfectly still, hoping whoever or whatever it was would just keep moving. The footsteps stopped. There was silence. Then, out of nowhere, a high-pitched laugh, almost like a child's giggle, echoed through the woods. It sounded wrong. I froze. My brain couldn't process it at first. Why would there be a child out here? This far from anything. The laughter faded, replaced by another round of murmured voices, low and urgent. I couldn't tell how many people there were, or if it was just my imagination running wild, but I was more scared than I'd ever been in my life. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but I couldn't make myself do it. I just stayed there, listening, hoping they'd go away. After a few minutes, maybe longer, it felt like forever, the voices faded, replaced by the heavy silence again. I could still hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I lay awake for what felt like hours, listening to every noise outside, every crack and rustle. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, it was dawn and the light was filtering through the trees. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The air was chilly and the ground was wet with dew. As I walked around my campsite, I noticed something odd, marks in the dirt all around my tent. At first, I thought they were just animal tracks, but when I looked closer, I realized they were handprints. Small, human-like handprints pressed into the soft earth. Not just a few, there must have been a couple dozen circling my tent, some overlapping, some spaced apart, like someone had been crawling or kneeling out there while I slept. I stared at them for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There was no way it could be kids, not this deep in the woods, not in the middle of the night. I looked for footprints, but all I saw were the handprints and a few long, dragging marks that disappeared into the trees. The silence felt heavier than before. I started packing my things as fast as I could, barely bothering to roll up my sleeping bag or fold the tent properly. I just wanted to get out of there. As I stuffed everything into my backpack, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something watching me from the tree line. The walk back to the house was a blur. I didn't stop to look at animal tracks or listen to the birds. I didn't even notice the beauty of the morning light or the smell of the damp earth. All I could think about was those handprints, the voices, and the laughter in the dark. When I finally saw the edge of our property, I almost ran the last 100 yards, bursting out of the woods and into the open like I was escaping from something. I never told my parents what happened. I wasn't even sure how to explain it. Part of me wondered if I'd just imagined the whole thing, if maybe I'd been dreaming. But the memory of those handprints in the dirt stayed with me. Sometimes when I can't sleep at night, I still see them in my mind, circling my tent over and over. I haven't camped alone in those woods since that night, and honestly, I don't think I ever will again. I'm a 29-year-old male, and I've always loved backpacking solo. Something about being completely alone in the woods is both calming and a little bit terrifying in a way I can't really explain. This happened about 2 years ago. In the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, I'd planned a week-long hike along a lesser-known trail. Nothing too extreme, but definitely off the beaten path. I'd done similar trips before, but this time felt different right from the start. Maybe it was the weather, or just the mood I was in. I remember that feeling of excitement mixed with unease as I double-checked my gear before heading out. The plan was simple: hike about 15 miles a day, set up camp wherever I found a good spot, and enjoy the silence. I started on a Monday morning. The forecast was cloudy, maybe some rain, but nothing I hadn't dealt with before. By the third night, I'd made it pretty deep into the backcountry. I hadn't seen another soul all day. No hikers, no hunters, no one. Around early evening, I found this small clearing just off the main trail. There was an old fire ring made of rocks and a couple of logs that looked like they'd been used as seats long ago. I dropped my pack, stretched my back, and started to set up my little green tent. As the sun set, I boiled some water for dinner, just instant noodles, but after a long day of hiking, it tasted amazing. While I ate, I listened to the woods settling in for the night, distant bird calls, the soft rustle of wind through the trees, and the occasional crack of a branch. It was the kind of peaceful quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. I cleaned up, made sure my food was hung up in a tree, and got into my tent. I read for a bit with my headlamp on, but soon my eyes started to close. It was completely dark outside by now. No moon, no stars, just thick, black forest pressing in from all sides. I woke up sometime after midnight, not really sure what had woken me. For a few seconds, I just lay there, listening. At first, it was quiet, so quiet. I could hear my own breathing. Then, somewhere off in the trees, I heard what sounded like a whistle. Not a bird call, not the wind, just a single sharp, deliberate whistle, like someone signaling. I propped myself up, holding my breath. After maybe a minute, it happened again. Same sound, a little closer this time. I tried to convince myself it was another hiker, maybe someone who'd gotten lost or was looking for their dog. But who would be hiking out here, this far off the main trail? In the middle of the night, the idea unsettled me. I lay back down and pulled my sleeping bag up to my chin, trying to focus on the sounds of the forest instead of that whistle. For a long time, nothing happened. I started to drift off again. Then, another whistle, this time much closer. This one echoed between the trees, sharp and clear, and for the first time, I felt a wave of real fear wash over me. I turned off my headlamp and just lay there in the dark, heart pounding. I waited, barely daring to breathe. Then I heard movement, slow, careful steps in the underbrush, circling the edge of my camp. Sometimes the steps would stop, and the silence would grow so heavy I'd wonder if I'd imagined it all. Suddenly, there was a soft crunch right outside my tent. I stared at the fabric, barely able to make out the shape of something moving just beyond the light from my dying campfire. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just listened, every muscle tensed, waiting for whatever it was to go away. Minutes passed. Maybe more, maybe less. I kept replaying every possible explanation in my head. Maybe it really was just a lost hiker. Maybe it was an animal, although I'd never heard a deer whistle like that. I thought about calling out, but something in my gut told me to stay silent. Then the footsteps started up again, moving in slow circles around my tent. Sometimes they'd stop, sometimes they'd crunch through the brush. There were no voices, no lights, just the occasional snap of a twig and that feeling of being watched. Every so often, the whistling would start up again. Never too loud, never frantic, just steady and controlled. It sounded closer each time, but I never saw a flashlight, never heard anyone speak. I could feel my own heartbeat in my ears, loud and fast. I tried to remember what I'd read about animal calls, about hikers lost in the woods, about how fear can play tricks on your senses, but the sounds were too real, too deliberate. I gripped the handle of my pocket knife, just in case, and tried to steady my breathing. At one point, the footsteps got so close, I could hear the leaves brushing against the side of my tent. I could even make out a faint shadow passing by, blocking out what little ambient light there was. I don't know how long I lay there, frozen. Maybe an hour, maybe just a few minutes. Eventually, everything went silent. No more footsteps, no more whistling, not even the sound of wind in the trees. I stayed like that for a long time, afraid to move, afraid to make a sound. Finally, exhausted, I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember is a thin sliver of gray dawn filtering through the tent. As soon as I realized it was morning, I sat up and looked around. Everything was damp and cold, and the forest was heavy with fog. I slowly unzipped my tent and peered outside, expecting to find, well, I don't know what I expected to find. The camp looked the same as when I'd set it up. Nothing seemed out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me all night. I packed up as quickly as I could, stuffing my sleeping bag and tent into my backpack with shaky hands. As I was rolling up my ground sheet, I noticed something odd in the dirt just beyond where I'd pitched my tent. There, in the soft earth, were several long, thin drag marks, like someone had slowly dragged a stick or maybe even their foot through the soil, circling my camp. There were also small indentations, almost like partial footprints, but not clear enough to say for sure if they belonged to a person or an animal. I scanned the tree line for any sign of movement, but the woods were silent and still. No birds, no squirrels, not even the usual morning insects, just thick, heavy silence, pressing in all around me. I double-checked my pack, made sure I hadn't left anything behind, and practically sprinted back to the trail. I didn't stop to eat breakfast, didn't stop to rest. I just wanted to put as much distance as possible between myself and that campsite. As I hiked, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me through the trees. When I finally reached a more traveled section of the trail, I let myself slow down and tried to calm my nerves. I thought about what had happened all night, replaying the sounds, the shadows, the strange marks in the dirt. Was it all just my imagination, or was there really someone out there, whistling and circling my camp in the dark? I finished the rest of my hike without incident, but the memory of that night stuck with me. To this day, whenever I'm alone in the woods and I hear a whistle, even if it's just a bird, I can feel that old fear creeping back in. I still go backpacking, but I don't camp alone as much anymore. Whatever was out there with me that night, I hope I never cross paths with it again.